No. The word came out of Dr. Nadia Osi Mensah's mouth before she even realized she'd said it. The room went quiet, not the polite quiet of people choosing silence, the sharp, airless quiet of people who couldn't believe what they'd just heard. She was standing at the foot of the operating table in Whitfield Crane Medical Center's most prestigious surgical suite. The one with the floor-to-ceiling glass walls, overlooking downtown Atlanta. The one they used for demonstration surgeries, the one they brought cameras into when they wanted the world to see what elite medicine looked like. 23 hospital board members above her sat in the observation deck above her, along with 6 department heads, 2 visiting surgeons from Johns Hopkins, and 1 man who had funded the wing they were all standing in. That man was Mr. Garrison Holbrook. Garrison Holbrook was 71 years old, and he looked it. Not in a dignified way, in the way of a man who had spent 7 decades being told he was right about everything, and had the posture of someone who expected the walls themselves to agree with him. He wore his money like a second skin. The custom suit, the titanium watch, the way his chin tilted upward whenever someone younger spoke. He had made his fortune in medical device manufacturing. He had donated $42 million to Whitfield Crane over the past decade. He had a wing named after him. He had an oil portrait hanging in the lobby. He had opinions about surgery, even though he had never once stood on this side of the glass. And right now, he was telling Nadia she was about to kill someone. The protocol, Holbrook said, his voice carrying easily through the overhead speakers, because of course they had the observation deck mic open. Of course they were recording this, has been the same at this institution for 11 years. You do not deviate from it, not in my operating room. It's not your operating room, Nadia said, and the protocol is wrong. The silence that followed lasted exactly 4 seconds. She counted them. The patient on the table was a 54-year-old woman named Vera Lockwood. Vera was a retired schoolteacher from Decatur who had raised 3 children by herself. After her husband walked out in 1999, she had a condition called hypertrophic obstructive cardiomyopathy, a thickening of the heart muscle that had been slowly strangling her heart for years. She had been waiting 14 months for this surgery. She had told Nadia the night before that she was more scared of not waking up than she was of the procedure itself. "I trust you," Vera had said, holding Nadia's hand with both of hers. "You look like my daughter." Nadia had not said anything to that. She'd just squeezed back. Now Vera was under general anesthesia, her chest open, her heart being sustained by the bypass machine that hummed steadily in the corner. Everything was ready. The team was ready. Nadia had reviewed Vera's imaging 17 times in the past 6 days. She had identified something in the latest CT scan, taken just 48 hours ago, that changed everything about the standard approach. The myocardial thickness on the posteriors greater than pre-surgical imaging had shown 9 millimeters. In cardiac surgery, that was not a rounding error. That was the difference between a successful resection and a perforation. The 11-year-old protocol called for a specific depth of tissue removal based on the original imaging. If Nadia followed it today, she would cut too deep. She knew it. Her attending, Dr. Frederick Oakes, knew it too. She had shown him the scans that morning and watched his expression shift. But Frederick Oakes was 62 years old and had been at this institution for 30 years and was very good at knowing which way the wind blew. He was standing to her left right now, and he had not said a word since Holbrook started speaking. "The imaging was taken 2 days ago," Nadia said. Her voice steady, her eyes on the monitor displaying Vera's heart function. "The posterior wall measurement has changed. Following the standard resection depth would create a 91% probability of posterior wall perforation. I've done the calculations. I have them printed. My attending has reviewed them." She did not look at Frederick when she said this. She didn't need to. Dr. O.C. Mensah. Holbrook's voice had the particular texture of a man who had never once been told no by someone who looked like her. "This hospital has a protocol, for a reason. I sat in the room when it was written. I helped fund the research behind it. Are you telling me that you, a third-year fellow, have found something that 11 years of institutional practice has missed? Yes, Nadia said. That's exactly what I'm telling you. Someone in the observation deck made a sound. She couldn't tell if it was a laugh or a cough or something else entirely. She was 31 years old. She had been born in Columbus, Ohio, to parents who had immigrated from Ghana in 1987. Her mother was a home health aide who worked 12-hour shifts and still made jollof rice from scratch on Sundays. Her father had driven a city bus for 22 years before his knees gave out. Neither of them had finished college. Neither of them had ever been inside a hospital like this one, except as patients. Nadia had gotten here on a full scholarship. Then another, then another. She had graduated top of her class from Meharry Medical College. She had matched into cardiothoracic surgery at Emory, which almost nobody did. And then, she had transferred here because Whitfield Crane had the best, minimally invasive cardiac program in the Southeast. And she wanted to learn from the best, even if the best sometimes meant rooms like this one. With men like that, behind glass above her head, she had known, from the first day of her fellowship, that she would be watched differently. Not with more scrutiny, necessarily all fellows were scrutinized, but with a particular kind of watching. The kind that was already holding a conclusion and looking for evidence to confirm it. She had been careful, meticulous. She had arrived first and left last. She had published 2 papers in her first 18 months. She had never once raised her voice in a meeting, never pushed back on an attending in front of a patient, never done anything that could be used as evidence for the conclusion she could see, forming in certain people's eyes. Until today, because today there was a woman on her table who had told her she looked like her daughter, and Nadia was not going to cut too deep. "I need you to step aside," Holbrook said. "I'm going to ask Dr. Oakes to proceed." Frederick. Nadia turned to her attending for the first time. His face was unreadable. "Tell them what you saw in the scans this morning." Frederick Oakes was quiet for a long moment. His hands were folded in front of him, gloved and still. He looked at the monitors, then at Vera's open chest, then at something in the middle distance that Nadia couldn't identify. He was a good surgeon. She believed that. She had learned from him. But learning from someone and trusting them completely, two of her tick things, and right now she could see him calculating. Really calculating. The way a man calculates when the answer costs something. "The posterior wall measurement was elevated," Frederick said finally. His voice was careful. "It warranted a second look." "A second look," Holbrook repeated. "That's not the same as scrapping an 11-year protocol mid-surgery." "Frederick." "No," Nadia said. "But it's not a protocol anymore. It's a mistake we're about to make with a living person's heart." She turned to face the observation deck directly. She looked at Holbrook through the glass. "Mr. Holbrook, I understand your confidence in the institutional standard. I understand you helped create it. What I'm asking you to understand is that protocols are built on imaging data, and the imaging data has changed. This is not a philosophical disagreement. This is arithmetic." She reached to the side table and picked up the printed calculations she had prepared that morning. She held them up toward the glass. 91%, she said. "That's not a margin of error. That's a near certainty of harm." Holbrook leaned forward in his seat. She could see him through the glass. The set of his jaw, the way his eyes moved from her to the papers, to her face, and back again with the expression of a man who was accustomed to having the final word and was currently finding that experience unfamiliar. "How old are you?" he said. The question landed in the room, like something dropped from a height. Nadia did not blink. "Old enough," she said, "to know the difference between a protocol and a patient." She modified the resection approach. She used a conservative posterior margin, 3 millimeters shallower than the standard protocol, with intraoperational guidance to verify depth at every stage. The procedure took 4 hours and 17 minutes. 40 minutes longer than typical, because she was careful, because she verified and re-verified, and did not move faster than the data allowed. When she closed, the heart rhythm was clean. The bypass machine came off without incident. Vera's vitals held. Nadia stepped back from the table at 6:42 in the evening, and her hands were not shaking. She had not let them shake for 4 hours and 17 minutes, and they were not going to start now. The scrub nurse, a woman named Dottie, who had been in that room for 19 years and had seen enough to recognize what had just happened, caught Nadia's eye over her mask. She didn't say anything. She gave a single, small nod. Nadia nodded back. She stripped her gloves at the sink and stood there for a moment, with the water running over her wrists, hot and then hotter. She was thinking about her mother driving to work in the dark. She was thinking about her father's knees. She was thinking about the way Vera had held her hand with both of hers and said, "You look like my daughter." She dried her hands. She went to find Vera's family. The family was in the third-floor waiting room. Vera's daughter, Renata, who was 26, and had taken the day off from her job at the USPS distribution center, and Vera's youngest son, Marcus, who had driven up from Macon that morning and still had motor oil on the back of his hands. They both stood up when they saw Nadia coming down the hall in her scrubs. She told them it went well. She told them the heart was beating on its own. She told them Vera would be moved to the ICU within the hour and that they could see her that evening. Renata cried, not the dramatic kind of crying, just the quiet kind, the kind that happens when something you've been holding very tightly finally gets to be set down. Marcus pressed his fist to his mouth and looked at the ceiling and nodded like he was agreeing with something. Nadia stayed with them for 12 minutes. She answered their questions. She explained what the recovery would look like, what to watch for, when they could expect her to come home. When she left them, she took the stairs down to the first floor because she didn't want to stand in an elevator right now. She needed movement. She needed the specific sensation of going somewhere under her own power. She was halfway down the second flight when she heard footsteps above her. Dr. O.C. Mensah. It was Frederick. He came down the stairs at a pace that suggested he'd been looking for her. She stopped and waited. He reached her landing and stood there for a moment, his hands in the pockets of his white coat. He looked different out of the surgical suite, smaller, somehow. Or maybe just more human. "I should have spoken sooner," he said. "In the room. When he asked me." Nadia looked at him. "You did speak," she said. "Not soon enough." He exhaled through his nose. "I've been in this institution a long time. Sometimes that's a liability." She thought about telling him it was fine. She thought about all the small diplomatic phrases that she kept in a ready supply for moments like this. "No worries. It all worked out. I understand the position you were in." She had a whole catalog of those phrases. She used them the way some people used umbrellas, preemptively, before the rain arrived. She didn't reach for any of them. "Vera is stable," she said. "That's what matters right now." Frederick nodded. He started to say something else and then didn't. He went back up the stairs. Nadia continued down. The call came at 9:17 the next morning. She was in her office, a small room she shared with 2 other fellows, full of stacked journals and an ancient cough maker that someone had duct-taped together at the handle, when her pager went off with the extension for the chief of surgery's office. Dr. Harcourt Vale was 68 and had the kind of face that had stopped being readable about 20 years ago. He ran Whitfield Crane's surgical department with a combination of genuine brilliance and an institutional loyalty, so deep it had calcified into something closer to reflex. He was not a cruel man. He was a careful one, which sometimes amounted to the same thing. She sat across from him at a desk that was roughly the size of her childhood bedroom and waited. "Mr. Holbrook has filed a formal complaint," Vale said. He was looking at a document in front of him, and he said this the way you might say the weather is going to change. Factual. Neither surprised nor particularly concerned. "He's alleging that you deviated from protocol without authorization and created unnecessary risk. The patient is in stable condition," Nadia said. "ICU numbers this morning were within normal range. No arrhythmia, no perforation, no post-op complications of any kind. I know that. Dr. Oakes reviewed my calculations the morning of the procedure and agreed the posterior wall measurement warranted adjustment. I know that too. Vale set down the document. Nadia, I'm not here to tell you that you made the wrong call. The outcome speaks for itself. He paused. What I need you to understand is that Garrison Holbrook is not someone this institution takes lightly. I know who he is, she said. He's suggesting your fellowship placement be reviewed. The room held still. She had spent 11 years in training to be exactly where she was. She had taken out loans that would take 15 years to pay off. She had moved 4 times, worked 200-hour weeks in her intern year, missed her cousin's wedding, and her best friend's baby shower, and her own 28th. Because she was in a hospital, being careful, being excellent, being everything she needed to be to get to the table she was finally sitting at. And now a man who had never held a scalpel wanted her placement reviewed because she had saved a woman's life in a way that deviated from a document he'd helped write. She breathed in through her nose. Is the review being initiated? She said. That depends, Vale said, on whether Mr. Holbrook considers the matter addressed, and how does one address a matter like this? Vale looked at her for a long moment. She had the feeling he was measuring something. Not her, exactly. More like the situation. The distance between what he knew was right and what the room required. He wants an apology, Vale said, and an acknowledgement that protocol should have been followed. Nadia sat with that for a moment. Outside Vale's window, she could see the parking structure, and, beyond it, a strip of November sky the color of old pewter. She thought about Vera in the ICU right now, her heart beating cleanly. Her daughter probably sitting beside her, reading something on her phone. She thought about the printed calculations she'd held up to the glass. 91%. She thought about the word apology. And what exactly it would mean in this context. It would mean, you were right. It would mean, I was out of line. It would mean, the next time there is a Vera Lockwood on my table, I will follow the document instead of the data. She could not say that. She didn't know how to say that. No, she said. Vale blinked. I will not apologize for a clinical decision that resulted in a positive patient outcome, she said. I will document my reasoning. I will present my calculations to the committee. I will accept any peer review of my methodology. I will do all of that. But I will not tell Mr. Holbrook that I should have followed a protocol that would have perforated my patient's heart. She stood up. If that means a fellowship review, then I'll face the review. She left his office before he could respond. She wasn't sure if that was brave or reckless or just the only thing her body knew how to do. The peer review committee met on a Thursday. There were 9 members. 6 of them were attendings she had worked alongside. 1 was a patient advocate. 1 was from hospital administration. 1 was from the ethics board. Holbrook was not in the room. He didn't need to be. Nadia presented her case for 47 minutes. She had printed everything. The original imaging, the 48-hour imaging, the comparison calculations, the intraoperative measurements, the post-surgical data, Vera's ICU chart from the first 72 hours. She had also pulled 3 published case studies from the past 5 years demonstrating outcomes in patients with similar intraoperative posterior wall changes who had been treated with standard protocol versus modified approach. She spoke clearly. She did not raise her voice. She did not use the word unfair or bias or discrimination because she knew those words would become the story instead of the data, and the data was the thing she needed them to see. When she finished, the room was quiet for a moment. Then Dr. Agatha Simmons, who chaired the cardiac surgery department and who had spoken exactly 4 words to Nadia in the 3 years she'd been a fellow, "Good morning" twice and "nice work" once, leaned forward and said, "Where did you train before coming here?" "Emory," Nadia said. "Cardiothoracic surgery. Before that, Meharry for my MD." Simmons nodded slowly. "And the intraoperative ultrasound approach you used? Who taught you that?" "I developed the specific application myself," Nadia said. Based on a technique I'd read about in a 2021 paper from Cleveland Clinic, I adapted it for the posterior wall verification. Simmons looked at the colleague to her left, a man named Dr. Terrence Webb, and something passed between them that Nadia could not fully read but felt. Somehow. Like weather changing. The patient outcomes. Webb said, not to Nadia, but to the room, are unambiguous. The vote was 7-2. She was cleared. She heard about Holbrook's response secondhand, from Dottie the scrub nurse, who heard it from someone in administration, who had been present for the conversation. Apparently Holbrook had been displeased. Apparently he had used the phrase, "This institution has a culture problem." Apparently he had mentioned, with some significance, the amount of money he had donated over the years. Apparently Harcourt Vale had said, in response, "Mr. Holbrook, I appreciate your investment in this institution. The committee's decision is final." Nadia did not know if that was true or if it had been embellished in the telling. She chose to believe it was true. She was in the ICU on a Friday afternoon when Vera Lockwood was moved out of it. There was a small moment, the kind hospitals don't make a ceremony out of, just a nurse adjusting the chart and an orderly with a wheelchair, and Vera looked up and saw Nadia standing near the door. "There she is," Vera said. Her voice was still rough from the tube, but her eyes were clear. "My doctor." Nadia walked over. She checked the chart first, the way she always did, because the chart was the chart, and you always checked it. Then she looked at Vera. "How are you feeling?" "Like someone cracked my chest open," Vera said. She was smiling. "Which I understand someone did. You're healing well. Faster than average, honestly. My mother always said I was stubborn." Vera reached out and took Nadia's wrist, not her hand. Her wrist. The way you'd check a pulse, which made Nadia think she probably had some medical background herself or had spent enough time in hospitals to learn the gesture. "Renata told me what happened, that there was a problem and you caught it." Nadia started to say something modest. "Don't do that," Vera said with a firmness that was probably exactly what 30 years in a middle school classroom sounded like. "Don't make it small. You caught something and you stood up for it, and I'm sitting here talking to you because of it. Let it be what it is." Nadia was quiet for a moment. "Okay," she said. Vera nodded. She let go of Nadia's wrist. "Your mother must be proud of you," she said. Nadia thought of her mother in the early morning dark, pulling on her uniform, packing a lunch in a plastic container, to save the $8 it would cost to buy something near work. She thought of her father driving the same route for 22 years, knowing every stop, knowing every face, knowing the city in a way most people never would. "She is," Nadia said. "And my father." "Good," Vera said. "They should be." The photograph appeared 3 weeks later. It was taken by a resident named Jay who had been in the observation deck during the procedure. Not for any of the drama, but because he was rotating through cardiac and was there to observe technique. He'd taken it at the moment Nadia held up her printed calculations toward the glass, shot from above through the observation window, so it caught her from a slight angle, in her surgical cap and mask. One arm raised, papers in her gloved hand. The bypass machine was visible in the background. The monitors, the whole landscape of that room. Jay had posted it in the hospital's internal newsletter with a caption that said only, "Dr. Nadia Ose-Mensah, Whitfield Crane Cardiac OR, November 14th. By the following Monday, it had been shared outside the newsletter. By Wednesday, it was on social media. Not viral, not the internet on fire kind of viral, but steady. A specific kind of sharing, person to person, with captions that said things like, 'This is what it looks like, and my daughter needed to see this,' and, once, from someone whose name Nadia didn't recognize. Simply, she said no. She heard about it first from Renata, who texted her a screenshot, with a string of heart emojis. She heard about it second from her mother, who called on a Sunday morning, the only time her mother ever called. Sunday morning, before church, and said, "Nadia, people are sharing your picture." "I know, Mom." Your father cried. Nadia was in her kitchen. She was holding a mug of coffee that had gone cold while she was standing there. She leaned against the counter. Tell him to stop, she said. I told him the same thing, her mother said. He didn't listen to me either, she laughed. It came out of her suddenly, the way things do when you've been holding your breath for a long time without realizing it. Not a performance of laughing, but the actual thing. Unplanned. Loose. Her mother laughed too. Outside Nadia's kitchen window, Atlanta was doing what Atlanta does in December, pretending it might snow, the sky the color of a secret it hadn't decided to tell yet. She stood there, in the cold light of her own morning, and thought about all the people who had held something up toward the glass for someone who mattered, at a moment when it would have been easier not to. She thought about the names of those people. How most of them were never photographed. How most of them were never shared. How most of them went home and made dinner, and put their kids to bed, and woke up the next morning and did it again. There are people in every room, in every institution, in every city, who see the number that doesn't add up and say so anyway, who hold up the proof, who do not apologize for the math. Most of them, the world will never know, say their names anyway.